No.
Hi, and welcome back to A Box of Cream. Today we're going to have a bit of a special episode because we have a guest. Would you like to tell the good people of the internet what your name is?
My name is Hendrik, and I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what we're going to talk about. This has been withheld. This is information which has been withheld from me, but I'm excited to face some tough questions.
So when I asked you, I didn't necessarily specify what was going to happen or what the idea was. I merely said, Hendrik, I'm starting a YouTube channel. Can I interview you on a topic of your choice? So I figured the topic would be philosophy, because Hendrik...
You see the dynamic already. It's a topic of your choice, but she proposes it. That's a very interesting semantic.
Well, I mean, you like philosophy. I think that's one of the main things that stands out for me about you, is that you're above average interested.
Yes. But I'm not only interested in philosophy, I think, I don't know whether it was a coincidence, but there is a book by Rainer Maria Rilke, it's no coincidence, no?
No.
Letters to a Young Poet, a book I would recommend everyone because it's a book of incredible, like classic wisdom and a very fine poetic language in which he's basically holding a dialogue with himself, but made out in the like rhetorical figure of another person. And Rainer Maria Rilke is basically he's a shaman of the language. And I think, I don't know why it was placed there, but probably to trigger some thoughts.
Yes, the book I brought, particularly for you, dear Hendrik.
And I already spotted in the introduction a mistake, because they say that he was from 1900 to 1902, lived at Worpswede, which is an arts colony, or artist colony, in Lower Saxony, Bremen. And they say it's in East Germany, although that's wrong. Just wanted to point that out.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hendrik. So that was a little short introduction. We're going to take a tiny break now, and then we'll be back with the hard questions for Hendrik. We are going to roast him like a rotisserie chicken, and it's going to be beautiful.
I'm a German potato, and I can just be fried.
Row of commercials. Hit me up, Fenty. So, Hendrik, when did you first realize that you were depressed? Okay, no, okay.
I think I'm one of the few people in Berlin who figured themselves out.
There you go.
Yeah, checkmate atheist, basically.
What specifically was it that drew you to philosophy?
I think it basically had to do with finding a set of thoughts which could be aspirational in a way that I think the normal like level of complexity of all daily thoughts is too low for me to be satisfied in engaging just with this majoritarian position of thoughts, which is basically not touching upon the issues which are really at like the peril of the times, basically. And philosophy offers ideas which are complex enough to satisfy a life which is striving for knowledge. And I think, like, I'm a left Hegelian who's really attached to the thought of individual anarchists, like Renzo Novatore, Max Stirner, but I'm also a Feuerbachian, and I think that these thoughts then go a little bit less ideological on certain issues and certain questions which are concerning the world, and this is where I feel at home.
Hendrik, everyone! I don't even know what to say after that. What the fuck am I supposed to say after that?
Don't make it awkward.
No, well, I'm trying not to, but it was like, it's really good.
There is no good and bad in this. It's my mother told me when I was a child that when I was asking her, how can you know things? And then she told me then that if you're reading books, you can increase your knowledge. And for me, the perspective on the world was, in order to understand the world as a child, I need to know what the world is about. And then she told me that you can read books and acquire knowledge through it. And this was for me like magic. You can just read this and then you will know about the world. And so like for the first 10 or 15 years of just reading, and I was a very, very theoretical person in everything, because the world is construed by words, concepts and intricate thoughts rather than the practical application of it. And I think this led me to be a little bit dissatisfied with the problem of applying theoretical ideas onto reality. But you also have to experience reality, and this is the embodied thoughts, which are also part of the philosophy of life, I think. And this then, because the overly complex thoughts which have been derived from the engagement with theory, then propelled me into accepting the strain of Stoicism, a certain strain of Stoicism, in order to ground myself again in the world, and become disaffected from the problems which arose through the difference between the theoretical application of ideas and the practical repercussions of a life lived in society. And I think I used Stoicism for 2 or 3 years as a medication to because you entered puberty, it was very difficult to engage with the world with the mind of a person who's engaging with his body in a different way, because the biology is kicking in, and it's not only discourse, it's also biology. And I don't know where I wanted to go with this thought, but basically I needed to find a way in order to curb the stress which has been exercised by the changes in my biology, and the non-correspondence between the changes in my biology and the thoughts which I acquired prior to the changes in biology. And it was a little bit overwhelming, and therefore I got into Stoicism and tried to get rid of all emotions which could be, I think, confusing for a young child whose bodily development is always a little bit behind his mental development.
So basically, when you do have that practice that on Sundays you like to have you days.
No, it's
that's not.
Bildungssonntag.
Bildungssonntag.
I can recommend it.
Do you want to tell the non-German speaking people what that means?
Well, at Bildungssonntag, I don't even know whether that's a thing in German culture, but for me it's a Sunday which is dedicated just to the acquisition of knowledge, but not only the pure acquisition of knowledge, but the basically creation of oneself through the acquisition of knowledge, but not only knowledge in an instrumental way, but knowledge in a way that furthers the way you operate, or makes you more sensitive, more knowledgeable about the world you're inhabiting, and it basically follows a little bit along the lines of thinking that in order to become a critical thinker you need time and space. And the Bildungssonntag gives you time and it gives you space, and it is also a ritualistic way of basically pushing away all the old daily doubts and what you have to do and what you want to do, etc., and just gives you a space of exception. And exception is space in a Benjaminian way, of an Arcadian realm in which you can get back to yourself and try to understand yourself through the engagement, intellectual, artistic and musical engagement with the world. And it also is strongly related to the idea that in Germany you have this Bildung. It's a very strong, also with a strong historical connotation, because it is derived, or there's a parallel to the Latin word of eruditio, and eruditio is basically you have a block of wood and you carve in that wood the person you want to become. But of course you need some guidance at the beginning, but in order to become an autonomous thinker, someone who's not a sheep, and who's not a wolf, because of course some people who think that they can escape being a sheep by becoming a wolf will later on realize that the prison has four walls from which they cannot escape, and sometimes it's not a physical prison but a mental prison. And I think therefore the Bildungssonntag is something which tries to keep me out of both prisons. And it creates an incredible surge of the quality of life in a weekly basis.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Bildungssonntag. We'll be right back after these messages. In our last conversation, we were talking about the Bildungssonntag and how you like to take Sundays, I guess, to decompress and decompose, reflect, and evolve, so to speak. So then I wanted to ask you, how is it for you, as a deeply intellectual human being, to function with other people?
I need my cave time.
Yeah.
So that I'm basically going back into the cave, and like what means that I need to save some energy for myself and read and listen to some music. And I think, funnily enough, this is a very beautiful cello, and I was just recently engaged with Rostropovich, a Russian cellist, who's one of the greatest cellists who has ever lived, basically. And I think one of his most famous pieces is Arpeggione, I don't know whether it's the right word, which is a Schubertian song, and he was, I think, performing it with Benjamin Button. No, Britain. Yeah, I'm not very good with names. With Britain, and because they had a lifelong creative relationship with each other, and yeah, I would recommend that song to everyone because it's fascinating, and I'm also recommending anyone to engage with Rostropovich, because he's a person whose basically whose eruditio is that they carved this block of wood, which basically was a wooden block which was unaltered yet, and etc., and they formed it into a cello, I think. That's basically his eruditio, his path of eruditio. And everyone who would listen to Rostropovich and also his very, very interesting biography, read it, and he would see that basically his eruditio is or his Bildung, or like whatever you want to create out of a human being, he created himself into a cello, a speaking cello, feeling cello, loving cello. And even Orpheus, then we are back at the instrument of music, who was basically a little bit like Rostropovich, because whenever Orpheus was playing, even animals would listen to his music, and I think Rostropovich also has the power to speak to animals or through his music, and to a deeper layer of human consciousness which connects all of us.
Jesus Christ, my glasses are fogging up as I'm listening to you. When you talk, the way you structure things, I personally love it. But do you get that a lot, that people tell you their first encounter with you, they feel you're pretentious?
Yes and no. I think people who are projecting certain patterns of experience which they encountered in other persons on new persons they encounter, that's a very, very human thing to do. We categorize, we compare experiences and then see certain patterns, and and symptoms which we want to categorize in a very easy way, and therefore we say this is that and this is that. This is a symptom of a certain way of communicating, or something which I have encountered before, and therefore I think it's pretentious. Of course, it's always the danger, but I think my syntax of the language of sentence or of ideas and thoughts which I mold into sentences is a very non-linear one. It's sometimes it fails at arriving at a conclusion, and I think this might be startling at some for some persons, but it is always also a question with what you are engaged. So in a sense, the limits of your words are becoming the limits of your world, and why I'm phrasing things in a certain way, or why I conceptualize things maybe in a non-normative, like heteronormative way, is sometimes I think more also because English is not my mother tongue, obviously, but I'm reading a lot in English, and I think I have a very strong Teuton impression on the English language, in that I'm sometimes not very faithful to the normal British English or American English syntax of sentences, because I just put the German way of thinking into the instrumentalization of another outlet of words in a different language. I don't even know whether that makes sense, but I'm really just throwing dices sometimes at ideas, and then the numbers of these dices turn into certain combinations with which I'm moving forward through a trail of thoughts, which I'm ad hoc developing.
For me, I was always curious, because what I find is, I don't know if you would call it hyper-intellectuals, but most of the people I know that I would categorize...
I don't subscribe to any of those words.
I know, it's fine. As long as you don't call yourself that, it's okay. But I did want to ask, because most of the people I would put in that box, they usually have a thing where they prefer their partners to be... how do you say this in a nice way? Not dumb, but yes, I guess a bit dim.
Why would you like that?
I was wondering if you also fall into that category.
Of selecting partners based on like an inferior intellect, and therefore it's easier to dominate that person, and then you feel constantly superior?
Not even dominate. It's just that you always have so many thoughts going on in your head at once. You just want something where it's easy.
No, I'm fundamentally interested in ideas, and therefore any challenge to the ideas I'm proposing as a means of engaging with the world are helping me to further the world I'm living in. So basically, the challenge to ideas must always be considered to be a very fruitful endeavor, because I'm not afraid to broaden the world, or to revise some of the oculars, or like some of the, I don't know, the shapes of the oculars with which I try to grasp the phenomenons of the world. I don't know whether that makes any sense, but it's basically, I think someone needs to be engaged with the world in the sense that the engagement with the world furthers the space of one's world, and it cannot happen without the challenge of the world itself, or the world in which you are engaged. And I think therefore it's a very 50s thing to think that you should have a woman or a partner of whatever gender or sex, or this is now very dangerous, to basically not be afraid to be challenged. I mean, this is a very, very big problem nowadays, that people are very afraid to be challenged, and there's also a very organic intellectual idea to it. That means that I rely on the production of a certain way of knowledge, which then reinforces the position I'm holding at the very moment. And I think that's a very, very insincere way of engaging with the world and with the phenomena of the world. And I don't subscribe a minute to it. But of course, we are human beings, we are animals, and we are highly biased, and we are so self-centered and narcissistic, and we have to always distance ourselves from ourselves in order to engage the other a little bit more. And I'm mostly I'm addicted to ideas in a certain way. I think ideas in any façon are basically a new. They are basically a new step of the stair onto which you are basically progressing to a higher level of seeing the world around you. And why do I use this term of the world so much? Because I mean, a world is not the world in a physical planetary manifestation, but it's also the world of like getting to know as many facets of this world with 1,000 eyes of the flies, and this facet eyes of the flies, and detecting many different shades of ideas, which are like sometimes different ideas represent different shades of different concepts or different positions, and therefore I think that therefore in a certain way I want to say that this concept that you would like to have a partner who is not going to be able to challenge yourself is basically meaning that you are not predisposed or willing to grow. Yeah.
Beautifully said. What is a better way to ask that question? Because it came off very bad.
It was a question which I think was a legitimate question, so I don't know why. In which way would you phrase it differently?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Then I'll keep it.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid over here with Hendrik. We'll be right back after these messages. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back at the bar with our favorite person, Hendrik. And of course, we got the maracas because life is good. Cheers, Hendrik.
Cheers.
To still being here.
Yeah.
How would you say that you release your creative juices? Because a man like you surely has a lot that he needs to get out. And how do you do it?
It's mostly a very sophisticated movement of the wrist. But I'm talking about changing the pages on the book.
Oh.
I'm German. I am not prone to jokes.
Hendrik, you also write. Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about what you're writing. What are you writing?
Well, I'm mostly writing at the Europe and Me magazine. It's an online magazine. It's a awarded online magazine which talks about a variety of issues, like with a lot of different voices. And I wrote 3 articles. One about the post-revolutionary role of desire in Tunisia. One about ressentiment. And I'm taking this question of ressentiment, which in my opinion is one of the most pressing problems of these times, where people do not sort themselves out anymore, but they try to project their problems externally. And the third and last article I've been writing has just been published at the Europe and Me magazine, and it is basically about the pharmakon of love in Iran. I was traveling in Iran for 2 weeks. Suddenly got into the demonstrations and towards the end of December and beginning of January 2018, where there were anti-government protests in Tehran, and I had to hide for 4 hours in a cafe. Then we drank some banana mango smoothies there, had some interesting discussions, and we're even smoking a joint there. So for 4 hours I was hiding in this cafe, while outside there were flashbangs and tear gas thrown at the demonstrators, and they were chanting that they don't want Persian or Iranian troops in Arab countries anymore, which relates to the Middle East conflict. And then I fled Tehran to Esfahan, and in Esfahan by coincidence I was wrong time, wrong place. The police came on a motorbike, 2 persons on a motorbike. One had a club at the back, and then he started clubbing us. And then I said, Mana Salmani, Mana Salmani. He looked at me, clubbed me again. And then I said, Mana Salmani. He looked into my eyes and thought like, oh, this looks like a foreigner. And then he left me. And then I was running for my life.
Yeah, but what does that mean, Mana?
Mana Salmani, I'm German.
Oh, because that helps.
Yeah, that helps because the Iranians are very, very, very friendly people. The Iranians are the most welcoming people I've ever experienced, ever. And they have very, very deep culture, which can be seen at Shiraz, where they have the tombs of the great poets, Shirazi, for example, and and so on and so forth. And so there's a bigger story. This is basically just the teaser to the first chapter of the story I was now presenting in this magazine. And the second story will talk more in depth about the pharmacon of love. Why is it the pharmacon of love? Because in Derrida, in term Jacques Derrida, it is basically the pharmacon can be something. If it's too much, then it kills you, and if it's not enough, then it basically will not affect it in a negative or positive way. And so basically that's the second article I wrote. I wrote about a woman who I met because I was couch surfing in the southeast of Iran, and it was in the city of Bam. And the city of Bam suffered a terrible earthquake in the beginning of the 2000s, I think, where thousands of people died, and the response mechanisms didn't really work out very well in Bam. And Bam, you have to imagine, is like a city of 1,001 nights, like the stories of 1,001 nights. It has a huge sand castle which looks like the castle of Aladdin, and I was couch surfing there, and basically we had very, very intense discussions because she was a woman who was married to a doctor there, and this doctor, it was basically a marriage out of convenience, not out of love. And she was very well educated. She lived in New Zealand. She got her education as a primary school teacher, and she also basically gave me the opportunity to go into a women's school, or for females, and they were teaching a little bit of English. And the first class was a little bit more estranged, and they were a little bit hesitant to ask some questions. And the second class was a class she had already for 2 years. They had a very, very strong relationship with each other, and they were very open. And they were asking everything. It was a thirst for knowledge, thirst for being able to ask certain questions which will not yield any negative repercussions. And this is also what I sensed during the 3 or 4 days. Suddenly, sometimes I woke up in the house, and then there were already 2 women sitting in the kitchen waiting for me so that we could have a discussion in the morning. And we were talking about everything, about Nietzschean philosophy as well. And because one woman heard about the rumor that there's a person who was not very keen about religion, and so we engaged in a lot of discussions, and it was a real feeling of thirst. It was something which was, they were able to travel a lot into Western Europe and to America because they were very rich. And this is the privilege they can basically have when they are rich, that they can go outside and they touch upon everything they could have, etc. And there's a certain desire towards it. But the whole idea of the pharmacon of love is that it's a very Western concept of love, that you're actually marrying someone who you love, and you're marrying him just because you love him, or her because you love her, because and this then transposed into the environment of the Islamic Republic of Iran is terrible in a sense, because there are no societal mechanisms, no cultural procedures or rituals which make it possible to embed this conception of love in a society which does not know how to respond to this conception of love. And so fast forward, it was a very, very strong experience for me. And she asked me or begged me to stay for another 1 or 2 days there. But I couldn't do it anymore because I was like the psychological punching bag for a whole community there. And then I said no, I'm going to go and move further. And then I was in the bus and I just couldn't really breathe because I had such a bad stomach from all of this. And then in order to release this this numbness, or like this physical numbness, I decided to write a poem about it. And so in the first 15 minutes I wrote it down very, very fast, and it's also now parts of that poem are also now in the article, and this article is going to be complemented by the rest of the poem. But the poem can also be found on my Instagram channel, which is Hendrik_Steinort, and maybe some people like it. And it was something which I needed to write down from my soul in order to basically be released from the experience. One crucial addition to that story is that woman decided to leave her husband and escape Iran, and is now present in, I'm not going to say in which city, but it's no, not in Europe.
Oh.
Hendrik_Steinort.
And I also have a philosophy blog on Tumblr. It's called whenyou'renothing.tumblr.com. And I'm doing it with a very, very dear friend of mine, which is Anatoly Scholz. And if you want to have a look at it as well. But trigger warning, we are a little bit liberal in the application of ideas.
You can ask me one question. What would you ask me?
How good are your editing skills?
I guess we will see. Hendrik Steinort, everyone. We'll be right back after these messages.
What kind of messages are those?
Propaganda.